We have the oil markets open in Asia this morning, a little bit up with Brent trading above $109. We're at a sort of a 2% jump in prices this morning. Of course, we've seen that migration up and down in the last week or so, up $100, $110 on Brent. Seems to be a range that this underpinned by this war in Ukraine, we kind of settled into this grinded out conflict with oil prices grinding up and down between 100 and 110, depending on the day's headlines, moves one way or the other. Let's welcome and kick off this morning with Henning Glostein, Director of Energy, Climate and Resources at the Eurasia Group. Henning, your thoughts on where the state of the conflict in the Ukraine is. Obviously, your president, Ian Bremmer, has been very vocal nearly every day about the direction of this and increasingly indicating the need for Europe to put an embargo on energy exports out of Russia. Where are we at this moment, a month in, at $110 a barrel on Brent?
Thank you, Sean. So, the conflict on the ground, according to our regional experts, is sadly, there seems little chance for a solution right now. There is no overlapping compromise that either side, i.e. the Russians and Ukrainians, could tolerate as a solution at this stage, which means that there is currently no solution. And of course, then recently the reports emerging from Ukraine about potential war crimes having been committed makes talking almost impossible at this stage, sadly. That, of course, as you say, does put some pressure on Europe to tighten sanctions. And of course, the ones that everyone's talking about is energy, oil and gas, most importantly. That is at this stage not being discussed seriously, though. The gas side is the one that Europe will do last because it would do most damage to Europe. It would cause energy rationing in Europe almost certainly at some point this year. Oil slightly easier with caution, but so coal would probably be the first one. The reason, though, why most Europeans don't want to do this at this stage is also that they do not think that imposing oil and gas sanctions on Russia would do anything to de-escalate the situation. It might actually escalate it further, so it would do damage at home and damage to the war at this stage. And that is why there's so much reluctance, and that is why they prefer to announce a shift away of Russian oil imports dependency as fast as possible without sanctions, which is so far what they're doing. But of course, with every report of more atrocities and more violence, the pressure is mounting to do more.
Let's welcome Sarah Akbar, Chairperson and CEO of OilServe Kuwait and Non-Executive Director of Petrofac. Sarah, we're seeing the Gulf maintaining and OPEC plus as a whole maintaining a rather neutral, somewhat agnostic position on the conflict in Ukraine. Is that a sustainable posture, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, because we cannot aggravate the situation by trying to get into this war and political standstill between Ukraine and Russia and between Russia and the West. So, if OPEC Plus does something which breaks up the alliance at this point in time, will have huge dramatic effect on the market. And you can see the market is barely managed from supply and demand point of view. And these oil prices, I think, are really harmful to the world economy. It's not like it's the best solution for the world economy at this point in time. So OPEC Plus will maintain their current position, and they will play this on the edge kind of role until things become, much clearer. Demand becomes maybe less due to, recession or China lockdown or something. But as long as the situation didn't change, I think the current play will continue.
The Kuwait has been one of the few countries, however, that has indicated or given guidance on not engaging with Russian companies in the oil supply chain. Is that impacting on the ground? Is that something worth noting?
No, we don't have, many Russian companies in Kuwait doing any kind of business, really. We have very mild, small relationships here and there, nothing significant. So, no impact whatsoever between, and we don't import much from Russia anyway. So, the situation in Kuwait is if we can stabilize the government, we have no issues with that.
Yes.
Our government is resigning today, and things will definitely, the political standstill we have is helping in making no decisions towards nobody. So not
Yeah.
Russia, the West, nobody. We are
Yeah,
so
well, then it's business as usual in Kuwait. Then paralysis at the parliament, just enough democracy to be paralyzed, but not enough to do any changes. It seems Kuwait is kind of locked in that posture. Let's go to Venezuela, another place where maybe is similar in that political structure. Jose Shalhoub, political risk and oil analyst, formerly with PDVSA. Jose, there's a lot of sort of noise in the sort of analysis of whether the U.S. is reaching out to Venezuela, whether there can be a moment in this crisis for Venezuela to sort of return a little bit into the fold with the U.S. and Chevron, of course, the biggest U.S. oil company that has operated in Venezuela for many, many decades. How do you see those talks, or are there talks or indeed breakthroughs there?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Thank you for the invitation. Well, yeah, there's been lots of speculations ever since this meeting of this U.S. officials that arrived in Caracas and held a meeting with Maduro officials in order to see if it's possible or not to get a deal, to get an adequate deal in order for Venezuela to try to fill some of the void left by by the banning against Russian oil imports into the United States. But that's it. They have been only speculations. There hasn't been any more news about any news or further talks. As you said, Chevron. Well, there has been a news about that the Biden administration has allegedly renewed the license for Chevron to keep on operating in Venezuela and keep on trading Venezuelan oil until December at least. But that's it. I mean, it's nothing new. It doesn't mean that any new U.S. oil companies, at least for now, are coming back. Let's remember, for example, that one of the largest U.S. oil company like Exxon used to have assets here, many joint ventures with PDVSA that were all of them nationalized and expropriated and confiscated. So that's one critical point, aside from many others, like including political negotiations, some political concessions that the Biden administration might, and my personal point of view, should have and should move ahead with some political demands on the Maduro administration in order to at least get some, but operationally speaking, also for PDVSA, it's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. You need investments. The damages, cost to PDVSA and the Venezuelan oil sector for many years, even before the imposing of sanctions in 2018 under the former Trump administration, is significant. So it's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be happening overnight. You need investments. You need better wages for Venezuelan oil workers still working in PDVSA. I'm not saying it's impossible, because we still have the largest oil resource in the world, but you need a total revamping of our entire sector. That's what I believe.
You wonder in ways, and we're not obviously going to answer it here this morning, but is Venezuela an example, Exhibit A of what could happen in Russia if indeed the international industry stays away from Russia for many years, and Halliburton and Schlumberger and all of the supply chain and service providers and all of that technology and expertise you need to maintain very, very large reservoirs. One wonders if that's the future, perhaps. Let's go back to Henning in Europe, because Henning, I wanted to get your views. Obviously, the question that Europe is now facing, we had the French president overnight calling for an embargo on oil and coal, not gas. We've had Lithuania step back from gas. And Poland calling for more harsher sanctions and so forth. The idea that there can be the maintaining of cohesion within the European Western Alliance. There's a sort of a fly in the ointment now with the re-election of the Hungarian Prime Minister Orbán, who is kind of surprised and shocked. The general consensus was that he may not get re-elected, and certainly not with a landslide. He has. He's pro-Putin. He's condemning the Ukrainian president, so he's very much off script here. What does that challenge present for this cohesive European position we've seen over the last month?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so many people running in different directions. France is, Macron is facing election as well, so he probably steps over a little bit about what he normally thinks and demands more than is probably possible because he needs to be re-elected. You mentioned Orban. Interesting, he has actually, despite his rhetoric, so far fallen in line with sanctions as they stand against Russia, though. So the interesting thing here, I find, is what Europe is trying to do is it is prioritizing a minimum joint plan of action against Russia, while exerting maximum pressure, which is, I mean, it sounds a bit contradictory, but that is what they're trying to do because they want to be seen as acting as one, which is hard enough as it is right now, as you see already. You already have a few countries that are demanding more, some are pulling back. And this is the challenge. The European Union is very, very keen not to fall to pieces that suddenly there's an outright disagreement and someone breaks rank totally and says, we're going to buy lots of oil, or the other one says, we're going to do absolutely nothing. And this is the challenge. And that is why they're gradually taking first coal, then oil, and as an absolute last measure, gas. And the other aspect to keep in mind here is that the EU wants to keep, certain ammunition in, some bullets in the gun to say, like, well, if we absolutely racket everything up now, and then more happens in Ukraine, more atrocities are uncovered. What's then? Is it intervention or not? So they want to keep some form of escalation. They need to preserve their own economy here as well. It's not just about zero growth or maybe a recession here. If all energy stops flowing in Europe, we are going to see energy rationing, and next winter people will freeze. This is, this is maybe not the case in Britain or some parts of France, but the more you go into sort of Central and Eastern Europe, including into Hungary, where Orban has just won, central district heating, which is gas-fired, is a real problem in winter if there's no Russian gas, and that is worth keeping in mind in all this. It's a really complicated situation. And
well, maybe when we come to you next winter, you'll be looking a little bit like Jose. In the dark with no electricity, and sort of half joking, but nonetheless, these are the destinations of these problems. Just quickly, Henning, to follow up on that, Orban, I just want to sort of dig in here a little bit more. Has been a sort of a thorn in the side of Europe for some time, but the European Union have struggled to deal with him around the issues of sort of the erosion of democratic institutions, because he has received cover from Poland, who is the big sort of protector of the Central European states from Brussels bullying, if you like. But Poland are probably the most hardcore anti-Russian in this coalition. Where do those two go now in this sort of my enemy is my friend, Poland and Hungary?
That's a really good point to make, because as you say, Poland and Hungary, the Visegrad states, they were sort of the bloc against the perceived bullies from Western Europe, especially the Germans. And now that bloc in Central and Eastern parts of the EU is a little bit divided itself. Poland is the stalwart against Russia. Hungary isn't. Poland now has really bigger problems than worrying about what's going on with Orban. They have something like 3 million refugees in their country to handle, so they really have bigger fish to fry at the moment. Of course, for Orban himself, this bullying factor from Brussels is still there. He really needs those billions of euros of recovery money from Brussels that Brussels has made conditional to democratic standards in Hungary. So it puts Orban into a complicated spot. That said, all these arguments that he isn't democratically elected have gone out the window. He has been democratically elected with a 2/3 majority, so he's
been democratically elected in a way that maybe Putin gets democratically elected. The leader of the opposition in Hungary had 5 minutes on television for the whole of the campaign. Because all of the media is controlled by Orban's political system. So it's a free and fair election as long as the opposition gets no coverage.
I wouldn't equate it with Russia at this stage. But,
well, I know.
You're right to say it's a slightly wonky.
I mean, one has to question it's within limits. It's free and fair peace. Because that's the consequence of eroding democratic institutions. What appears, everything is an appearance now, perception. But Sarah, not to deviate too much, perception and reality coming to an OPEC plus near you. The decision that was made last week to go ahead with the increase again next month, which obviously also includes a raising of oil production quotas, including for Kuwait and the UAE and Saudi and Russia. Just starting with Kuwait, will Kuwait be able to increase its production to meet this new quota? Will the others? What is your sense of the group as a whole? You're on mute, Sarah. Sorry. Still on. Yep. There we go.
So the reality, Sean, I've been saying this for a while now, that none of these OPEC countries have the capacity to increase significantly. I mean, the UAE, yes, probably they do have some. Saudi, maybe for a short while they can increase production, but seriously.
What about Kuwait?
No, I don't think Kuwait has the capacity to increase production. So the investments that were needed to go into the industry over the last few years have not gone into the industry. And none of the OPEC countries, even within OPEC Plus, has the capacity to increase more before 2-3 years minimum. So I think there is a forecast that says by third quarter 2023, supply demand will balance at around 104 million barrels. So and this is based on the level of investment and the quick actions that many countries have to do in order to get more capacity to balance supply demand. So the investment had gone. Now there is a whole suite of investment going into the business all over. And this is typical what happens, in the oil and gas cycles, where investment, we have the situation where we are very tight, and then a whole lot of investment goes, and then we have a lot of surplus. And this has been cycle that I have seen throughout, my 40 years industry now. It's systematic, and every time it happens, it's the lag between investment and actual results from that investment going live. So,
Sarah, I wanted to get your views just to sort of on the next step in that conversation is, of course, this OPEC Plus agreement is running its course right now. Clearly, there's going to be no change, even the last few months, regardless of the context. The world needs more oil. It doesn't. OPEC Plus isn't even delivering the oil it's committed to deliver. But ultimately, this agreement this pact with the OPEC Plus expires, ends in September. Where does it go from there, do you think, in a world in which it's really, we need as much oil as anybody can pump, please pump. Where does this alliance go in September?
Well, I think, once everyone is pumping their max, there is no reason for this anymore. And the oil prices were, more than what they hoped for, really. The 100 was not the target price. They were targeting like $60, $70, and they would have been happy at that level. But now, since they are at 100 and they are pumping max, all of them, so where would this alliance? I mean, there is no alliance anymore. Now it is the question of how much investment each country has a capability of doing more investments in order to increase capacity. So that is the kind of situation. And it depends on what is the situation of Russia in this, because if things ease off, I think there will be less demand on Russian oil in Europe, and that will mean a lot to Europe itself, that is trying to diversify. And I think, I don't know if you heard about the super fund they're trying to put together into investing into renewable and new energy, so that they actually do not depend on Russia for their oil or gas. So that means the acceleration of renewable will be something that is, a result of this current conflict in Ukraine, Russia. And that means the demand for oil will be less, which means that we'll go back into the cycle where we have more supply and,
And you have the U.S. shale production sort of being as it did in the past, that sort of coming back with a significant amount. But that said, it kind of feels like an inflection moment where we saw overnight coal prices in the U.S. up above $100 a ton for the first time since 2008. So this sort of acceleration of energy transition towards cleaner fuels, or an acceleration towards restarting nuclear power plants and consuming coal. It seems like both, there's a crossroads to choose here. But Jose, I just wanted to come back to you on the question of whether there really is an opportunity. I mean, the U.S. and the permanent 5 members of the Security Council are struggling to get across the line with a deal with Iran that seems to be permanently locked in just about not getting there. But in Venezuela, is there anything that Venezuelan government could do to ease this sort of division with Washington? I mean, without major compromises, or is this a very wide bridge between the two?
Yeah, well, yeah, as I was telling you, I mean, there's different, potential bargaining chips, as I call them, like for the US and Venezuela to maybe, for example, the government still Maduro still has a key ally in the US being judged, being prosecuted, which is called Alex Saab, under charges of corruption and different other charges, which is, I mean, he's critical for the Maduro government. And there hasn't been any charges, any definitive charges against him. He's still in Miami, and the government of Maduro wants him. So that could be a key. The other key issue.
Just to understand that, Jose, there's a former judge of Venezuela taking refuge in Miami who's wanted for crimes back in Venezuela.
No. This person is a dealer who is a key ally of the Maduro government, who used to trade food, but he's been accused of irregular activities in different parts of the world. His name is Alex Saab. He was extradited from the Ivory Coast to the US. Okay. So he's been prosecuted in the US. And there's the issue of Citgo, which is still under control of the opposition and linked with Juan Guaido, and is a US-based company, but is still linked with PDVSA, but it's not getting oil from PDVSA yet. So there's different, chips to negotiate with the US and Caracas in order to allow for different US oil companies to return to Venezuela. And the other thing is for maybe the US could demand PDVSA and the Venezuelan government to try to wean itself away from the still Russian presence here. Let me tell you that there's one large consortium that absorbed all the past operations of Rosneft and Gazprom, which is called Rosneft still controls 100,000 barrels per day in joint ventures with PDVSA. So maybe that could be another point to negotiate with between the US and Caracas in order to maybe, if it's like saying, well, okay, we're coming back to Venezuela, we're coming back to joint ventures with PDVSA, but okay, allow me to invest, allow me to take control of the majority of your operations or the majority of joint ventures, but watching how the invasion of Ukraine is going, watching how Russia is still under massive sanctions, and considering that many officials of the Venezuelan government and many entities still have banking accounts in Russian banks, which are under sanctions, so that could be another point to negotiate with.
Okay, well, there's a long list there to keep lawyers busy for a while. Let's get the survey question in before going around for last thoughts this morning. Do you think the application of more sanctions other than oil and gas will correct or reverse the course of Russia's war on Ukraine? That more sanctions, we were hearing all the headlines this morning, more sanctions being baked in Washington and Brussels. Will more sanctions other than oil and gas correct or reverse the course of Russia's war on Ukraine? Yes or no? Welcome the view of this room on that point. Henning, there's different issues blowing up. I'd welcome your thoughts on that question, but also to comment on some of the technicalities of this conflict. Without there being official sanctioning on oil and gas, there is the great insurance. We all need insurance, and most importantly, ships need insurance. And so the London marine insurers have extended high risk definition to areas, to all Russian waters, which ultimately means that if you're going into Russian waters as a shipper, it's going to cost you a lot more money. I'm wondering your thoughts on that structural impact on the market, and also the point asked in the question.
Yeah, so I mean, this is another risk factor and another cost factor in global supply chains, which was stressed before this war erupted, and now they're in acute distress. And it's, I mean, anything shipping. I mean, we've seen it's not just oil and gas problems. In fact, the grain crisis caused by this war is at risk of seriously causing food shortages in many parts of the world. And this is also related to shipping that's not coming through. So if this is put on top of that, it adds further problems. One thing I'd like to point out here, and it's been mentioned in the chat a little bit, and you, Sean, mentioned it as well. For sure, in the short run, the Europeans are having to do absolutely everything to plug any gap and prepare for a potential cutoff, which includes more coal consumption. But these talks that this will derail the green transition are just not accurate. Every single major government in Europe has doubled down on the green transition, is spending billions of euros in addition to what was already planned on renewables, on hydrogen, on water heat pumps, on absolutely everything that is not oil and gas imports, because these supply chain problems do highlight a problem. If it's not just a fossil fuel problem, if you are reliant on huge supply chains of imports from around the world, it also exposes you to disruption risk, not just to high price risks. So if you've got a risk of disruption long term with partners that you don't want to trust in the long term, and you've got fossil fuel problems and high prices, and with the climate debate and the IPCC report out today again, or yesterday actually, that tells you in the long term as a policymaker and a long-term investor to invest into clean and local supply chains. And this gets overlooked a little bit in this conflict sometimes, despite all the problems that this will mean. And they won't solve the problems of this year next, but they will solve long-term problems.
Let's get the last word from Sarah with the survey result first. So no, a big overwhelming no. Do you think the application of more sanctions will correct or reverse the course of Russia's war in Ukraine? A big exclamation point, no. Sarah, meanwhile, in our neighborhood here in the Gulf, there has been some good news in the last, over the weekend, and the announcement of a ceasefire in the conflict in Yemen. And the Saudis had said that as long as there's missiles coming from Yemen, they would not be able to participate in helping the world with more oil at this time. I'm just wondering your analysis on the ceasefire in Yemen and what it means for the region.
Well, you see, one of the issues here is that the Houthis who are actually firing these missiles were not party to the discussions. So I really don't know if this is one-sided ceasefire, so the allies will not keep bombing Yemen, or what is the story here? Because the reality is, if they are not on the table and discussing, there will not be a true ceasefire, and they will continue to do whatever they are doing. Now, the change here is if the discussions between Saudi and Iran are expedited somehow so that they have agreement, I think this Yemen thing will go to sleep. But before that point, I don't think the ceasefire or any of the discussions they are having now will really impact the situation in Yemen.
There'll maybe be just a temporary timeout. You're just quickly, Sarah, your thoughts on this point that seems to be holding up the Iran talks in Vienna, that the Iranian Republican Guard gets redefined as taken off the U.S. terrorist list. Do you think that happens? Is that a deal breaker, do you think, for the region? I mean,
I think it is a deal breaker for the Iranians and for the US, because the Revolutionary Guards are the people who are really in control in Iran, and they are the ones who call the shots, and they have their own kind of government. They are ruling. So if they are, and for the US to get them off the list, and this is a military organization, I really don't know how this will work, but it is the deal breaker in this discussion.
Well, it does look like this deal could break then, perhaps. Let's call an end to our session here today. From Jose in the darkness, we do appreciate, and hopefully light will return. Maybe Henning could give you some of that excess light he has over his head there. Henning, thank you so much. And Sarah as well, thank you for your thoughts and insights today, where oil prices are trading up 2% in early trade in Asia, with Brent at around just below $110 a barrel. All the best. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.